Hi, welcome to Local Matters. I'm your host, Ken Moore. One of the things that is important to a community is land use. The urban growth boundary is something we've all heard about, and I think it's something that needs more understanding. So I've got the person on my show today that I'm so delighted to bring to you, Marilyn Dell-Worrix. She's the former chair of the LCDC, and I'm delighted to have you with me today. Thank you so much.
I'm very pleased to be here. Land use planning, close to my heart. Always love to have a chance to talk about it.
And I came straight to you for that conversation. Thank you. Let's go back to the beginning, 1973, Senate Bill 100. How did that happen?
Well, it was a combination of factors, really. There was a lot of change going on in the whole country, really, in 1973. And in Oregon, there were some very strong personalities that, at the same time change was happening, that just was the right people, the right time, the right climate. Governor McCall, at the same time we had a very strong senator, Angus McPherson, who had a dream about land use planning, and it all came together and they started talking about it and they made it happen very quickly. It was known as Senate Bill 100, and it was visionary, as Oregon tends to be when it does something. It's out there first, it's on the cutting edge, and Senate Bill 100 that established land use planning was just that.
And what difference has it made?
It's made a huge difference. Oregon would simply not look the way it does today if we hadn't had Senate Bill 100.
How does it look?
Drive through Oregon, or better yet, fly over Oregon. You can tell when a city stops and agriculture begins. You're not going to see a Walmart in the middle of nowhere the way you will when you drive through some other states. There is a clear boundary where farmland begins and cities end. And you simply wouldn't see that. You don't see that in other communities. There are some statistics that support the fact that it has worked. One, for example, is that from the mid-80s to from the mid-60s to the mid-80s, cities across the country tended to absorb 6 times more land than they had population. They were just gobbling up land. Oregon, during that same time period, was growing faster than most cities and only used 1/6 the land for its cities. We were really good stewards. We weren't using the land. Another good example is that in about 1987, if you looked at the amount of land that was for farmland in Oregon, and then you looked in 2009, 99% of that was still in farmland. We became very protective of it, and we've kept it in farmland.
So our agricultural industry would be much different without Senate Bill 100.
It would.
It would be.
I'm not even sure what our wine industry would be if we hadn't had Senate Bill 100. Nobody really saw that as necessarily being wonderful farmland, but it fell into the category of farmland. It was protected, and we have an amazing wine industry today.
The term urban growth boundary sets up a tension right in the very name. Growth boundary. Cities need to grow. True or false?
Cities need to grow, and that was part of the program at the very beginning. What a city needs to do as part of the plan is establish a plan for 20 years. How many people are you going to get in 20 years, and how are you going to take care of them? The program doesn't say, you just have to be as tight as you can be and not grow any more than you possibly can. That's not the program. The program says, estimate the number of people you're going to have in 20 years and figure out how you can accommodate them with good planning. How much land do you need? Where are you going to put it? How are you going to do housing for those people? How are you going to accommodate the employment land that they need? And plan for it in a thoughtful way, and plan where you're going to put them so that you can avoid farmland as much as possible.
And the same kind of tension is in the title of the committee that you chaired. The
Yes.
land, or the land development.
Land conservation
Conservation and
development, because it is supposed to do both. When the program started back in 1973, the state established goals, a list of goals, and they were principles. And some of them are things like farmland protected, forestry protected, but also in there is development. Economic development is one of the goals. So it isn't just to protect farmland, although economic development and protecting farmland are certainly, can be one and the same. But economic development is also one of the goals. And so it is not just the goal to protect land. It is also to do it in such a way that we continue to spur good development.
I've heard that when businesses are in a well-planned urban growth boundary, they do better by their proximity to each other rather than being sprawled out over large distances. And also it uses infrastructure better. If urban sprawl happens, roads stretch out to serve these small populations, utilities have to be used in a way that's not as efficient. So keeping that boundary intact is actually good for business and agriculture.
What's good for business is predictability.
Okay.
Knowing that they have transportation systems, knowing that they have services, knowing that they have facilities available to them that they can count on. And good planning makes that happen.
There were some rules that changed and impinged on the uses of land that people originally bought the land for. And there was a lot of pressure around that. And so along came Measure 7, Measure 39, Measure 47. So it ended up with Measure 47. How has that addressed that problem? Has it been successful?
Yes, and there's been a tension right from the beginning over private property rights and the need to actually impose the need to satisfy the general good at the expense of some of those private property rights. And where is that balance? That balance isn't the same for every person. I'm going to give you a quick example because I think a personal example kind of brings it home. I owned a little 10-acre orchard, edge of town. Plan was to build a home on it. Plans changed. I sold it to a couple from California. They were going to retire. They were in their 60s. They bought the land. They go back to California. A few years later, they retire. They come back ready to build their home. Rules have changed. They find they cannot build their home.
Yeah.
Basically, bottom line, they find out they can't build it. It's the only thing they can do with this land is sell it to the neighboring farmer. They have one buyer. It's an old orchard. It doesn't even produce. These people lost their complete retirement fund that they used to buy this land. Oh. Pretty hard to look somebody in the eye and give them that kind of news. So a lot of people, including myself, thought we really shouldn't have to build this system, which I've been in favor of from day one, but we shouldn't have to build it on the backs of people like that. So where is that balance? And Measure 47 or Measure 37 was an attempt to find that balance, but it had unintended consequences, was very complicated, and 49 was an attempt to find a better balance and to make it a little simpler. Yes, I think it's taken the pressure off of that pressure cooker. Okay. And I think basically it has found that balance.
You know, I think in your recent work, you've gone after this next pressure cooker, should I say, and that is the permitting process, the application process to move the urban growth boundary out. And cities have been, McMinnville, for example, has been very frustrated with that. Newburgh, things are moving again there slowly. What are some of the ways you've addressed some of these problems?
It's become way too complicated. McMinnville spent years on it and just a ton of money and finally just threw up their hands and gave up. Part of the reason is because coming up with a plan for 20 years that says this is how many people we're going to have and this is how we're going to handle all those people is very complicated. And over the years, it's gotten more so. So now we got 40 years of experience looking at all these plans. We know a lot more now. So it isn't necessary for us to make a city jump through every hoop and do this study and spend all their money, because we know what some of those answers are going to be. So we got legislation passed in the last session that allowed us to simplify this process. The first example is population. Every city had to do a study to estimate what their population will be. There is now a rule in place that says every city will get their population projection from Portland State. If they choose to use it, not only is it a safe harbor and they're good to go, it is non-appealable. Because not only did every city have to go through the hoops to do the study, but then because somebody didn't like the number, it was always appealed in court anyway, so they had to justify it in court.
Costing millions of dollars
It
sometimes.
just on and on and on, money, time, and tension. So population is just the first step in that process. What is your population going to be and how are you going to, but then after that, how are you going to house them? How much housing do you need? How many housing units? How much employment land do you need? How much for parks? Well, we kind of know the answers to those things because we've been reading these applications for 40 years. So depending upon the size of a city, how fast it's been growing, whether it's close to a large urban area, we can give that city a range.
You've addressed this tension, I think, and that's the good news. What's next? We just have about a minute and a half left. Where's the pressure now? Where are you addressing your efforts?
Once the simplification is done, and I think we're really close to making a major change in that area, I think we continue something we've been working on for some time, and that is to integrate land use planning even more closely with all the other areas. Transportation, we've been working on that a long time, but even more closely, all transportation and land use planning needs to be integrated very closely.
What would that look like if land use planning was integrated with transportation? How is that? Why isn't it now, or how?
Well,
is
it
it not
is, but I think the Department of Transportation and Land Use and the Department of Land Use have to work even more closely together than they do now. They are two separate agencies.
And climate change.
Climate change needs to be just integrated with land use in every discussion. Agriculture is not going to look the way it does now, 50 years from now.
When you don't anticipate some of what that's going to look like.
We do.
All right. Are you going to be on those committees, on those commissions?
I don't know. My time expired on LCDC, and I'm saddened by that because I'm going to miss it. But I termed out, and I certainly hope to find some way to keep my excitement going over land use.
I'm sure they'll be calling you up
I hope they do.
Wanting your help. Well, thank you for helping us understand a lot more about what's
I'm
going
delighted.
on. Thank you very much, Marilyn. Well, thank you for joining us. I'm your host, Ken Moore, with Local Matters, and tune in again. We'll have another great conversation.